The rain fell in sheets against the rusted metal awning of Jerry's diner, creating a steady rhythm that almost drowned out the sporadic coughing of the ancient coffee machine behind the counter. My fingers ached as I wiped down the same spot on the faded laminate for the third time, the smell of industrial cleaner mixing with grease that had been accumulating since before I was born. "Order up, Ellie!" Jerry's gruff voice barely registered over the clatter of plates and the drone of the late-night news on the small TV mounted in the corner. I tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, wincing as my fingertips brushed against the bruise blooming at my temple. Dean had been particularly angry last night. Something about the phone bill. The memory made my stomach clench, but I pushed it away. I couldn't afford to lose this job. Not when I was only $340 away from having enough to finally leave this town. "Coming," I called, forcing brightness into my voice that I didn't feel. The diner was empty except for Marge, a regular who came in every Tuesday for the meatloaf special, and a young couple sharing a milkshake in the corner booth. The storm had kept most people away, and if things stayed this quiet, Jerry might send me home early. The thought made my heart sink. Early dismissal meant less tips, and less tips meant one more week in Dean's apartment, one more week of walking on eggshells. The bell above the door jingled, and a gust of cold air swept across the diner. I turned, order pad in hand, and froze. He was drenched from the storm, water dripping from his black leather jacket onto the checkered floor. His dark jeans were spattered with mud, and his boots left wet prints as he moved toward the counter. But it wasn't his rain-soaked appearance that made my breath catch. It was the intensity in his eyes, deep brown, and somehow both cold and burning at once, as they locked with mine. Something primitive in my brain whispered danger, even as my body betrayed me with a flash of heat. Coffee. Black. His voice was low, graveled, like he didn't use it often. I nodded, suddenly aware of how threadbare my uniform was, how the fluorescent lights must be highlighting the shadows under my eyes. I turned away quickly, grateful for the excuse to break that unsettling eye contact. As I poured his coffee with trembling hands, I heard the soft squeak of a leather stool as he sat at the far end of the counter. From the corner of my eye, I could see him surveying the diner with methodical precision, his gaze lingering on each exit before returning to rest on my back. I felt the weight of that stare like a physical touch. When I placed the mug in front of him, his fingers brushed against mine. Intentionally, I was sure. An electric current raced up my arm. "Thank you." He didn't smile, but something in his expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Bad night to be on the road. We don't get many travelers during storms like this," I replied, fighting the urge to fidget under his scrutiny. "Especially not on bikes." His eyebrow quirked. "How'd you know I ride?" I gestured to his jacket, the telltale scuffing at the elbows. "That's not just a fashion statement." A ghost of a smile touched his lips, transforming his face from merely handsome to devastating. "Observant." A sudden crack of thunder made me jump, and in the brief moment the lights flickered, I caught the glint of something metallic beneath his jacket. My heart stuttered. A gun? Or was my imagination working overtime after too many late-night crime shows? "You okay?" he asked, and I realized I'd been staring. "Fine," I lied, retreating behind the counter. Just jumpy from the storm, the couple in the corner booth waved for their check, and I gratefully escaped his presence. As I processed their payment, I felt his eyes follow me, assessing, calculating. When they left, the bell's cheerful jingle seemed at odds with the tension that had settled over the diner. Jerry emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on his stained apron. "Storm's getting worse. Weather Channel says it'll be like this all night. You might as well head home, Ellie. Not gonna be any more customers in this mess." Panic fluttered in my chest. Home meant Dean, probably drunk by now, waiting to unleash whatever frustrations his day had brought. "I can stay," I offered quickly. "Finish the closing checklist early." Jerry's eyes flicked to the stranger at the counter, then back to me with a frown. "You sure? I can handle him if you want to go." I shook my head. "It's fine. Really, the truth was, I'd rather take my chances with the mysterious biker than face Dean tonight. At least here, In the fluorescent-lit diner with its streaked windows and chipped mugs, I could pretend to be someone else, someone stronger, someone who didn't flinch at sudden movements. Jerry disappeared into the back office with a shrug, and Marge left soon after, leaving just me and the stranger in the rain-soaked quiet. I busied myself with mindless tasks, refilling salt shakers, wiping down menus, anything to avoid further interaction. But when I turned from the supply shelf, he was standing at the register, coffee mug empty. "What do I owe you?" he asked, and I noticed for the first time the faint accent underlying his words. Something European maybe, Italian or Spanish, smoothed by years in America but still detectable. "On the house," I replied. "It's just coffee." He studied me, and I had the distinct impression I was being dissected, catalogued. Generous. "It's nothing." I waved away his thanks, but he caught my wrist, turning it gently to expose the angry fingerprint bruises circling it like a bracelet. "This doesn't look like nothing." His voice remained even, but something dangerous flashed in his eyes. I jerked my hand back, tugging my sleeve down. "I'm clumsy," I mumbled, the familiar lie bitter on my tongue. "Is that what he tells you to say?" My eyes snapped up to his face, shock replacing embarrassment. "I don't know what you're talking about. I think you do." He placed a $100 bill on the counter. "For the coffee." "I can't." I started to protest, but he cut me off. "You can, and you will." There was no room for argument in his tone. It wasn't threatening, exactly, but it carried the absolute certainty of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Before I could respond, a deafening crack split the air, and the diner plunged into darkness. The storm had taken out the power. "Shit," I muttered, fumbling behind the counter for the flashlight Jerry kept for emergencies. My fingers closed around it just as a hand wrapped around my upper arm, and I let out a startled yelp. "Easy." The stranger's voice came from directly beside me. "It's just me." My heart hammered against my ribs as I flicked on the flashlight, illuminating his face in harsh relief. This close I could smell him, leather and rain and something expensive beneath it all. His proximity made it hard to breathe. "Do you have somewhere to stay tonight?" he asked, and for a wild moment, I thought he was propositioning me. "I have an apartment," I said carefully. "With the man who did that to your wrist? And this?" His fingers hovered near the bruise at my temple, not quite touching. I swallowed hard. "It's complicated. It usually is." A wry smile curved his lips. "My bike won't start. I checked it before coming in. Something's wrong with the electrical system." I frowned, confused by the abrupt change in topic. "There's a motel about 5 miles down the highway." "In this storm? On foot?" He shook his head. "Is there anywhere closer?" The only place within walking distance was Mrs. Holloway's boarding house, but she'd closed it last winter after her hip replacement. The building stood empty now, awaiting renovation that would probably never come. "No," I admitted, "nothing close." Jerry emerged from the back office, flashlight beam bouncing wildly. "Power's out all over town according to the emergency radio. They're saying lines are down everywhere. Could be days." He looked between us, suspicious. "Everything okay out here?" "Fine," I said quickly. "Just discussing accommodation options for our guest." "Well, he can't stay here," Jerry grumbled. "Insurance won't cover it." I bit my lip. The thought of sending anyone out into that storm, even a stranger who set off every warning bell in my head, seemed cruel. I hesitated, already regretting what I was about to offer. "My neighbor has a spare room. She's away visiting her daughter. She gave me a key to water her plants. I'm sure she wouldn't mind if you stayed there tonight." It was a lie. Mrs. Peterson would absolutely mind, but she wouldn't be back until Sunday. By then, the storm would be long gone, and so would he. The stranger's eyes narrowed slightly, as if he was trying to determine if I had an ulterior motive. Finally, he nodded. "That's very kind." Jerry looked like he wanted to object, but just sighed instead. "You be careful, Ellie. I mean it." He turned to the stranger. "And you. I've got her license plate memorized, just so you know." The implied threat would have been laughable coming from Jerry, who was 67 with a bad back. against this man who radiated coiled danger. But the stranger merely inclined his head in acknowledgement. "I'll get my jacket," I said, disappearing into the back room to collect my things. As I grabbed my worn purse and threadbare coat, I caught sight of my reflection in the small mirror hanging on the wall. Pale face, dark circles under my eyes, hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. I looked exactly like what I was, a tired waitress with too many problems and not enough solutions. What was I doing? Offering shelter to a man who was clearly dangerous, a man who carried a concealed weapon and looked at me like he could see every secret I'd ever tried to hide. But the alternative was going home to Dean. And somehow that seemed far more terrifying tonight. When I returned, the stranger was waiting by the door, his broad shoulders blocking most of the view of the storm outside. He held the door open for me, and as I passed him, I caught a whiff of that scent again, masculine and expensive. "I'm Ellie, by the way," I said, raising my voice to be heard over the howling wind as we stepped outside. He hesitated for a fraction of a second. "Nick." It was a lie. I was certain of it, but I nodded anyway. We all had our secrets, and tonight, I was collecting one more. What I didn't know then, as we ran through the rain toward my ancient Honda with its rusted fenders and temperamental heater, was that this simple act of kindness would shatter the fragile scaffolding of my existence. That the man who called himself Nick would rewrite every rule I thought I understood about survival. And that by morning, nothing in my life would ever be the same again. I fumbled with my keys in the rain, drops pelting my face and blurring my vision. The stranger, Nick, stood silently beside me, his presence like a wall between me and the storm. When I finally managed to unlock the car, he opened the driver's door for me, waiting until I was settled before circling around to the passenger side. "Where's your bike?" I asked as I turned the key, silently praying that my temperamental Honda would start. "Behind the diner," he replied, his eyes scanning the road ahead as the engine sputtered to life. "I'll come back for it tomorrow." The windshield wipers struggled against the deluge, creating smeared half-moons of visibility. I clutched the steering wheel tightly, leaning forward as if those extra inches would somehow improve my ability to see through the wall of water. "Take it slow," Nick said, his voice oddly gentle. "No rush." The drive to my apartment complex usually took 5 minutes. Tonight it felt like an hour. The streets were deserted, the power outage having transformed the town into a dark, shapeless void, broken only by the occasional flicker of candlelight from windows. I tried to focus on driving, but I was acutely aware of Nick's proximity in the confined space of my car, of the way his knee occasionally brushed against mine when I shifted gears. We passed Dean's building, and I felt a knot of anxiety twist in my stomach. His windows were dark. Either he wasn't home, or he was passed out. I wasn't sure which option I preferred. "You live with him?" Nick asked suddenly, and I realized he'd been watching me as I stared at Dean's apartment. "Not anymore," I said, my voice smaller than I intended. "We broke up 3 months ago. He hasn't accepted it yet." Nick's expression darkened. "And the police?" I laughed, a hollow sound that contained no humor. "In this town, Dean's uncle is the sheriff. Filing a report would only make things worse." We lapsed into silence until I pulled into the crumbling parking lot of my apartment complex. The 3-story building had seen better days. Its once white exterior now a dingy gray. The concrete steps cracked and uneven. "Home, sweet home," I muttered, cutting the engine. For a moment, we sat in the sudden quiet, the rain drumming on the roof creating a cocoon of sound around us. Then Nick reached across me to open the glove compartment, his arm brushing against mine. I froze, confused, as he removed a small flashlight I'd forgotten was there. "You'll need this," he said, placing it in my hand, his fingers lingering against my palm a beat longer than necessary. The stairwell was pitch black, the emergency lights having failed along with the power. I led the way, the narrow beam of the flashlight illuminating just enough of the steps to prevent us from tripping. The air smelled of mildew, and someone's attempt to mask it with cheap air freshener. My apartment was on the 3rd floor at the end of the hallway. As we approached, I fumbled with my keys again, suddenly self-conscious about the state of my home. It was clean. I was fanatical about that, but it was sparse, with second-hand furniture and bare walls. I'd never bothered to decorate, treating the place as the temporary solution it was meant to be. Mrs. Peterson's apartment is across the hall, I explained as I unlocked my door. Let me just grab her key. I stepped into my darkened apartment, acutely aware of Nick hovering in the doorway. I didn't invite him in, and he didn't presume, standing with one shoulder against the frame as I navigated by flashlight to the kitchen drawer where I kept spare keys. When I returned, key in hand, he was gone. Panic surged through me for a reason I couldn't articulate. I stepped into the hallway, calling his name softly, only to find him standing at the end of the corridor, peering down the stairwell. "Everything okay?" I asked. He turned, expression unreadable in the dim light. "Fine. Thought I heard something." My skin prickled with unease as we crossed to Mrs. Peterson's apartment. The key stuck in the lock, requiring a specific jiggling technique that Mrs. Peterson had demonstrated when she'd asked me to water her countless plants. "Sorry," I muttered, cheeks warm with embarrassment as I struggled with the door. "It's tricky." When the lock finally gave way, I pushed the door open and stepped aside to let Nick enter. Mrs. Peterson's apartment was a mirror image of mine in layout, but that's where the similarities ended. Where my place was sparse, hers was cluttered with a lifetime of collectibles, porcelain figurines, framed photographs, embroidered pillows. The air smelled of potpourri and something else, a lingering hint of the lavender perfume she always wore. I handed Nick the flashlight. "Bathroom's down the hall on the left. There's probably food in the fridge, though it might start to spoil without power. The bedroom's at the end of the hall." He took the flashlight, his fingers brushing mine again. "And where will you be?" "Across the hall," I replied, unsure why his question made my heart rate quicken. His eyes held mine in the dim light. "Alone?" "Yes." He nodded, seeming satisfied with this answer. "Thank you, Ellie, for your kindness." It was such a formal way of expressing gratitude, oddly old-fashioned, and it took me aback. "It's nothing," I mumbled, backing toward the door. "Good night." I retreated to my apartment, locking the door behind me and sliding the chain into place. For several minutes I stood in the darkness, listening to the rain against the windows and my own ragged breathing. What had I been thinking? Bringing a stranger home, a man who carried a concealed weapon and looked at me like I was a puzzle he was determined to solve. But there was something about him, something beyond the dangerous aura and penetrating gaze, that had compelled me to help him. A flicker of recognition, perhaps, of one damaged soul identifying another. I changed into sweatpants and an oversized t-shirt by the meager light coming through my bedroom window, then crawled under the covers, too exhausted to bother with finding candles. Sleep should have come easily after the long shift, but my mind raced, replaying every interaction with Nick, analyzing his expressions, his careful words. I must have drifted off eventually, because the next thing I knew, I was jerking awake to the sound of my front door rattling in its frame. For a disoriented moment, I thought it was part of a dream. Then it came again, the distinctive sound of someone testing the lock. My blood turned to ice as a key scraped in the door. There was only one person besides me who had a key to my apartment. Dean. I scrambled out of bed, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The chain would hold. It had to. But Dean, in a drunken rage, was capable of breaking it. He'd done it once before, leaving splinters in the doorframe that I'd carefully repaired, painting over the damage as if erasing the evidence could somehow erase the memory too. The door shuddered as he pushed against it, the chain going taut. "Ellie!" His voice, slurred and angry, confirmed my fears. "I know you're in there. Open the goddamn door." I backed away, searching frantically for my phone, before remembering it was still in my purse by the front door, too close to him. "Go away, Dean," I called, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's over. We've been over for months." "Your car's in the lot," he growled, rattling the door harder. "Who's with you? Is that why you won't let me in?" Terror closed my throat as the chain strained against his weight. It wouldn't hold much longer. I lunged for my bedroom window, thinking wildly that I could climb out onto the fire escape, but it was stuck, swollen from years of humidity and neglect. I shoved against it with desperate strength, just as I heard the sickening crack of the chain breaking. Heavy footsteps crossed my living room. "Where is he?" Dean demanded, his voice closer now. "Where's the guy you're fucking?" I spun around, pressing my back against the window, as Dean's silhouette filled my bedroom doorway. Even in the darkness, I could see the rage contorting his features. He reeked of whiskey and stale cigarettes. "There's nobody here," I said, hating the tremor in my voice. "I'm alone." He lurched forward, grabbing my arm so hard I knew it would bruise. "Liar. I saw you at the diner. With him." I twisted in his grip, panic making me stronger than usual. "He was just a customer. Let me go, Dean, you're hurting me." His other hand tangled in my hair, yanking my head back. "You think I'm stupid? You think I don't know when my girl is—" "She's not your girl." The new voice, cold, precise, cut through the room like a blade. Dean froze, his fingers still painfully twisted in my hair. Nick stood in the doorway of my bedroom, his silhouette darker somehow than the shadows around him. He'd changed clothes. The leather jacket was gone, replaced by what looked like an expensive suit jacket, the white shirt beneath it gleaming faintly in the darkness. "Get out," Dean snarled, releasing me to turn toward the intruder. "This is between me and my girlfriend." "Ex-girlfriend," Nick corrected, his tone conversational despite the menace radiating from him. "And I think she asked you to leave." Dean laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Who the fuck do you think you are? This is my town, asshole. You don't want to mess with me." In the dim light filtering through my window, I saw Nick smile. It wasn't a pleasant expression. It was the smile of a predator who had just spotted particularly easy prey. "On the contrary," Nick said softly, "you don't want to mess with me." Something in his voice must have finally penetrated Dean's alcohol-fogged brain, because he hesitated, swaying slightly on his feet. "Dean, please," I whispered, seizing the moment of uncertainty. "Just go. I'll talk to you tomorrow when you're sober." He glanced back at me, conflict evident in his expression. For a moment, I thought he might actually listen. Then his face hardened, and he turned back to Nick, fists clenching. "You think you can come into my town and—" He never finished the sentence. Nick moved with shocking speed, closing the distance between them in what seemed like a single fluid step. There was a dull thud, a choked gasp, and then Dean was on his knees, one arm twisted behind him at an unnatural angle, Nick's hand clamped over his mouth. "Listen carefully," Nick murmured, his lips close to Dean's ear, voice so low I had to strain to hear it. "If you ever touch her again, if you so much as look in her direction, I will find you. And what happens next will make this seem like a loving caress. Nod if you understand." Dean nodded frantically, eyes bulging with pain and fear. "Good." Nick released him with a shove that sent Dean sprawling onto the floor. "Now get out." Dean scrambled to his feet, holding his injured arm against his chest. He backed away, eyes darting between Nick and me, face pale with shock and dawning sobriety. "You're fucking crazy," he spat, but the bravado was gone from his voice, replaced by genuine fear. "Perhaps," Nick agreed pleasantly. "Would you like to test the theory?" Dean turned and fled, his footsteps pounding down the hallway and stairs. The silence that followed was deafening. I stood frozen by the window, my entire body trembling with adrenaline and residual fear. Nick remained motionless in the center of my bedroom, his back to me, head slightly tilted as if listening for Dean's return. "Are you hurt?" he asked finally, turning to face me. I shook my head, then realized he probably couldn't see the gesture in the darkness. "No." "Thank you." He moved closer, and I tensed involuntarily. He stopped immediately, respecting the boundary. "He won't bother you tonight," he said. "But tomorrow, when he's had time to nurse his wounded pride and ego, he might return with reinforcements." The thought sent fresh fear coursing through me. His uncle will not be a problem. The certainty in Nick's voice was both reassuring and terrifying. Who was this man who could make such claims with such confidence? "How did you know?" I asked. "That he was here?" "I heard him in the hallway." Nick's voice softened slightly. "I was concerned." Concerned was such a mild word for whatever had brought him across the hall with such lethal precision. I hugged myself, suddenly aware of how exposed I felt in my thin t-shirt and sweatpants. "Your door is broken," Nick observed. "You can't stay here tonight." I laughed. a brittle sound edged with hysteria. I don't have anywhere else to go. Yes, you do. He held out his hand. Grab what you need. You're staying in Mrs. Peterson's spare room. I should have protested. Should have thanked him for his help and insisted I would be fine, but the thought of spending the night alone in an apartment with a broken door, jumping at every creak and shadow, was unbearable. So I nodded, gathering a change of clothes and my phone while Nick waited in the living room. When I emerged, he was standing by the front door, examining the splintered wood where the chain had ripped free. "I'll fix this tomorrow," he said, as if repairing a stranger's door was the most natural thing in the world. As we crossed the hall to Mrs. Peterson's apartment, I found myself wondering once again who this man really was. He moved like a fighter, spoke like someone educated, and wore clothes that, even in the dim light, I could tell were expensive. "You're not really a biker, are you?" I asked as he unlocked Mrs. Peterson's door. He glanced at me, something like amusement flickering in his eyes. "What makes you say that?" "The suit, for one thing, the way you move, the way you talk." I gestured vaguely at him. "All of it." He pushed the door open, stepping aside to let me enter first. "People are rarely what they first appear to be, Ellie." It wasn't an answer, but I was too exhausted to press for more. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness that made my limbs feel leaden. Nick showed me to the spare bedroom, a small space dominated by a twin bed and more of Mrs. Peterson's knickknacks. "Try to rest," he said, lingering in the doorway. "We'll figure things out in the morning." There was something comforting about the way he said "we," as if my problems had somehow become our problems. As if he hadn't just wandered into my life hours ago, a stranger in a storm. "Nick?" I called softly as he turned to leave. "Who are you, really?" He paused, his silhouette sharp against the hallway shadows. For a long moment, I thought he might actually tell me the truth. Instead, he simply said, "Someone who recognizes a cage when he sees one." With that cryptic response, he disappeared down the hallway, leaving me alone with more questions than answers, and the strangest feeling that my life had just veered onto a path I had never anticipated, one that would either lead to salvation or destruction. And the most frightening part was that, in that moment, I didn't care which it would be. I woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar curtains. For a disoriented moment, I couldn't remember where I was or why the air smelled of lavender and dust instead of my usual discount fabric softener. Then the events of the previous night crashed over me. The storm, Nick, Dean's intrusion, and my hasty relocation to Mrs. Peterson's spare room. Sitting up, I checked my phone. It was already past 9. I'd slept later than I had in years. Outside, the storm had cleared, leaving behind a brilliant blue sky visible through the window. The power was still out. The digital alarm clock on the bedside table remained dark and silent. I dressed quickly in the clothes I'd grabbed the night before, jeans and a faded blue sweater, and ran my fingers through my tangled hair, wishing I'd thought to bring a brush. When I emerged from the bedroom, I was immediately hit by the rich aroma of coffee. Following the scent led me to the kitchen, where I froze in the doorway, momentarily stunned by the scene before me. Nick stood at the stove, his back to me, dressed in dark trousers and a crisp white shirt, with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows. The muscles in his forearms flexed as he flipped what looked like an omelet in a cast-iron pan. 2 place settings had been arranged at Mrs. Peterson's small kitchen table, along with a French press full of steaming coffee. He must have heard me, because he turned, spatula in hand. In the clear morning light, I could finally see him properly. His features were striking, sharp cheekbones, strong jaw darkened with stubble, and those intense brown eyes that seemed to miss nothing. A thin scar ran along his right temple, disappearing into his hairline. "Good morning," he said, his expression softening slightly. "I hope you don't mind. I found supplies and thought you might be hungry." "Where did you get coffee?" I asked, still hovering in the doorway. "The power's still out." He nodded toward a small camping stove set up on the counter. "I always keep emergency equipment in my bag. Useful in situations like this." Of course he did. Somehow it didn't surprise me that this man who radiated preparedness and control would have a contingency plan for power outages. "Come sit," he said, gesturing to the table with the spatula. "It's almost ready." I slipped into one of the chairs, still feeling like I'd stepped into someone else's life. Nick poured coffee into a mug and slid it toward me, then returned to the stove. "I fixed your door this morning," he said casually, as if repairing broken doors for strangers was something he did every day. "It's not perfect, but it should hold now." "You didn't have to do that," I said, wrapping my hands around the warm mug, "but thank you." He shrugged, plating the omelet and bringing it to the table. "I told you I would." The omelet was perfect, fluffy eggs filled with cheese, peppers, and what tasted like herbs from Mrs. Peterson's windowsill garden. I couldn't remember the last time someone had cooked for me. "This is amazing," I said after the first bite. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "My grandmother. She believed a man should know how to feed himself properly." I tried to picture him as a boy, learning to cook at his grandmother's side, but the image wouldn't form. It seemed impossible that this dangerous, controlled man had ever been a child. "Your accent," I said, curiosity getting the better of me. "Where are you from originally?" He took a sip of his coffee, considering me over the rim of the mug. "Sicily, but I've been in America since I was 18. The admission surprised me, not the origin itself, but the fact that he'd answered truthfully. Or at least, I thought it was the truth. Something about the way he said it felt genuine. "What brought you here?" I asked, emboldened by his openness. "Family business," he replied, his tone making it clear that particular avenue of conversation was closed. We ate in silence for a few minutes, the only sound the occasional clink of forks against plates. It should have been awkward, sharing breakfast with a virtual stranger in a borrowed apartment, but somehow, it wasn't. There was an ease between us that defied explanation. "What's your plan, Ellie?" he asked finally, pushing his empty plate aside. I frowned, confused. "Plan?" "For Dean. For your life here." His gaze was steady, assessing. "You were saving to leave, yes? How much more do you need?" The fact that he'd deduced this, that he'd been paying such close attention, sent a shiver down my spine. "About $300, I admitted. "But I don't see how—" "I can give you that," he interrupted. "More, if you need it." My spine stiffened. "I don't want your money." Something like respect flickered in his eyes. "Pride, I understand. But consider it a loan, if that makes it easier." I shook my head, pushing back from the table. "You don't even know me. I know enough." He leaned forward, his gaze intent. "I know you work hard. I know you're kind. You helped a stranger in a storm. I know you're trapped in a situation that's slowly killing you." He gestured to the fading bruise at my temple. "And I know what it's like to need an escape route." That last part caught me off guard. What had this man, who exuded power and confidence, ever needed to escape from? Before I could formulate a response, there was a sharp knock at the door. Nick's entire demeanor changed in an instant, his body tensed, hand moving reflexively toward his waistband, where I suspected his gun was concealed. "Are you expecting anyone?" he asked, voice dropping to a near whisper. I shook my head, fear clenching my stomach. Had Dean returned? Perhaps with his uncle in tow? Nick motioned for me to stay seated, then moved silently to the door, positioning himself to the side of it rather than directly in front. "Who is it?" he called, his voice neutral. "Ellie? You in there?" Jerry's familiar gravelly voice came through the door. "It's Jerry from the diner." Relief washed over me. "It's okay," I told Nick. "He's my boss." Nick nodded but remained vigilant as he opened the door, blocking most of the entrance with his body. Jerry stood in the hallway, looking uncomfortable and out of place in his faded plaid shirt and worn jeans. His eyes widened slightly at the sight of Nick, then darted past him to find me. "Hey, Ellie," he called. "You okay? Power's still out all over town. They're saying it might be another day or two." I moved to stand beside Nick, oddly comforted by his protective stance. "I'm fine, Jerry. Thanks for checking." Jerry shifted his weight, clearly uneasy. "Listen, I just wanted to let you know that Dean came by the diner this morning looking for you. He was... well, he didn't look good. Arm in a makeshift sling, face all bruised up." Nick remained impassive, but I felt the tension radiating from him. "He was saying some pretty wild stuff," Jerry continued, glancing nervously at Nick. "About your friend here. Said he attacked him last night. That's not what happened," I said quickly. Dean broke into my apartment. He was drunk and he grabbed me. Nick just intervened. Jerry nodded, not looking surprised. Figured it was something like that. But here's the thing. Dean's uncle was with him, Sheriff Wallace. They're talking about pressing charges. His eyes flicked to Nick again. Assault. Maybe worse. My blood ran cold. Sheriff Wallace had made it clear in the past that he considered me the source of his nephew's problems, not the other way around. If he decided to target Nick, "Thank you for the warning," Nick said, his tone formal but not unfriendly. "We appreciate it." Jerry hesitated, then leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Look, I don't know what's going on here, and I don't want to. But Dean's bad news, Ellie, always has been, and his uncle's worse. If they're gunning for your friend," he trailed off, the implication clear. "Anyway, just wanted you to know. Diner's closed till the power's back, so take a couple days. Paid leave." This last part was so unexpected that it took me a moment to process. Jerry had never offered paid leave before, not even when I'd had the flu so badly I could barely stand. "Thanks, Jerry," I said, genuinely touched by his concern. After Jerry left, Nick closed and locked the door, his expression thoughtful. "He's afraid," Nick observed. "Not just of Dean and the sheriff. Of me." I blinked, surprised by the assessment, but realized he was right. There had been an undercurrent of fear in Jerry's demeanor that I'd attributed to concern about Dean. "Why would he be afraid of you?" I asked, studying Nick's face for clues. "He doesn't know you." Nick's smile was thin. Sometimes people recognize danger even when they can't name it. A chill ran down my spine at his words, but before I could pursue the topic, my phone rang. I glanced at the screen and felt my heart skip a beat. It was Mrs. Peterson. "Hello?" I answered, trying to keep the panic from my voice. "Ellie, dear." Mrs. Peterson's cheerful voice came through the speaker. "How are you? How are my plants holding up in this dreadful weather?" I swallowed hard, glancing around her apartment that was currently being occupied by a strange man and myself. "They're fine, Mrs. Peterson, but listen, I need to tell you something." "Oh, that's not why I called," she interrupted. "I'm staying with Judith longer than expected. Her husband has to go away on business, and she asked if I could help with the grandchildren for another week. I said yes, of course, family first, don't you think?" Relief flooded through me. "That's great, Mrs. Peterson. I'll keep taking care of the plants." "Such a dear girl," she cooed. "Oh, and Ellie? I heard from Marge about the power outage. If you need a place to stay, feel free to use my apartment. The spare room is all made up, and there's food in the freezer. Just make yourself at home." I nearly laughed at the irony. "Thank you, Mrs. Peterson. That's very kind." After hanging up, I relayed the conversation to Nick. "So, we have a temporary reprieve at least?" "Good," he nodded, "but it doesn't solve our more immediate problem." I raised an eyebrow. "Our problem?" "Yes, our problem." His gaze was unwavering. "I made an enemy of Dean and his uncle last night, and while I'm perfectly capable of handling them, I'd rather not complicate matters. So, what do you suggest?" I asked, crossing my arms. He checked his watch, an elegant timepiece that looked far too expensive for a casual biker. "I have associates arriving in town this afternoon. They'll help secure the situation." "Associates?" I echoed, unease creeping back into my voice. "What kind of associates?" Instead of answering, Nick pulled out his phone and made a brief call. He spoke rapidly in what I assumed was Italian, his voice low and commanding. I couldn't understand the words, but the authority in his tone was unmistakable. This was a man accustomed to giving orders and having them obeyed without question. When he ended the call, he turned back to me. "Pack a bag," he said. "Enough for a few days." I stared at him, incredulous. "Excuse me?" "Dean and his uncle will be watching your apartment, the diner, anywhere they think you might go," Nick explained with the patience of someone outlining a basic concept. "It's not safe for you to stay here." "And where exactly am I supposed to go?" I demanded. "With me," he said simply. The casual confidence with which he made this suggestion left me momentarily speechless. "I barely know you," I finally managed. "You know I protected you when you needed it," he countered. You know I could have taken advantage of your vulnerability last night, and I didn't. You know I fixed your door and made you breakfast. His eyes softened slightly. What else do you need to know, Ellie? Your real name, for starters, I said, surprising myself with my boldness. Who you really are. Why you're in this town. He studied me for a long moment, and I had the distinct impression he was making calculations, weighing risks against benefits. Finally, he nodded. Decision made. My name is Niccolo Russo, he said, the Italian pronunciation rolling off his tongue in a way that made my name for him, Nick, seem like a pale shadow. I am the head of the Russo family, based in New York, and I am in your town because I was looking for something. The formal way he introduced himself, the unfamiliar family name, meant nothing to me at first. Then the implication of family, in that particular context, combined with his accent and the unmistakable aura of danger, clicked into place. You're with the Mafia, I breathed, taking an involuntary step back. He didn't deny it. We prefer family business. My mind raced, trying to process this revelation. I'd suspected he was dangerous, perhaps a criminal, but this was beyond anything I'd imagined. And what were you looking for in our town? Something shifted in his expression, a subtle softening I might have missed if I hadn't been watching him so closely. Initially, a business opportunity. The highway that runs through here makes it strategically valuable. Initially, I echoed, catching the qualifier. His gaze was steady, unflinching. Plans change, Ellie. There was a weight to those simple words that made my heart race. I had a sudden, inexplicable certainty that he was talking about me, that somehow, in the span of less than 24 hours, I had become a factor in whatever calculation this dangerous man was making. Why should I trust you? I asked, voice barely above a whisper. Because right now, I'm your best option, he replied, brutally honest. Dean will not stop. Men like him never do, and his uncle has the authority to make your life very difficult. He was right, and we both knew it. Dean's obsession had only escalated over the past 3 months. If he now had his uncle actively supporting him, my options were severely limited. Where would we go? I asked, not quite an agreement, but no longer an outright refusal. I have a property about 2 hours from here, secluded, private. We'll wait there until my associates have resolved the situation with Dean and the sheriff. The casual way he spoke about resolving the situation sent another chill through me. I didn't want to know what that entailed. And after? What happens then? I asked, needing to understand the full scope of what I was potentially agreeing to. Niccolo, it was impossible to think of him as Nick now, stepped closer, not touching me but close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body, smell the expensive cologne that clung to his skin. After, he said softly, you will have choices, Ellie. Real choices, not the illusion of them. If you want to leave this town, I will ensure you have the means to go anywhere you wish. If you want to stay, I will make certain Dean and his uncle never bother you again. And what do you get out of this? I asked, suspicion warring with the undeniable pull I felt toward this man. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Let's just say I have a vested interest in your well-being. It wasn't a real answer, but I sensed it was all I would get for now. I took a deep breath, weighing my options. Stay and face Dean's escalating rage and his uncle's corruption, or go with a self-admitted mafia boss to an unknown location. Both choices terrified me for entirely different reasons. I need to think, I said finally. Niccolo nodded, stepping back to give me space. Of course, but we need to leave by noon if we're going to avoid complications. I retreated to the spare bedroom, closing the door and leaning against it, my thoughts in turmoil. What was I even considering? Running away with a man who had casually admitted to being a crime boss? It was madness, and yet, the memory of Dean's hands on me, of the terror that had become so familiar it was almost mundane, rose in my mind. I was already living in fear. At least Niccolo's danger was honest, declared rather than hidden behind false claims of love and protection. There was something else too, something I was reluctant to admit even to myself. In the brief time I'd known him, Niccolo had shown me more consideration and respect than Dean had in our entire relationship. He'd protected me without trying to own me, helped me without demanding gratitude. I sank onto the bed, my gaze falling on a framed photograph on the nightstand. Mrs. Peterson as a young woman, radiant in a wedding dress beside a handsome man in uniform. They were both beaming, frozen in a moment of perfect happiness that had clearly been fleeting, given that Mrs. Peterson had been a widow for as long as I'd known her. Life offered no guarantees, no promises of safety or happiness. All we could do was make choices, and hope they led somewhere better than where we started. I stood, decision made, and began to pack. The sleek black SUV pulled up outside Mrs. Peterson's apartment building at precisely noon. I watched from the window as a man in a dark suit emerged from the driver's side and scanned the area with practiced efficiency before opening the back passenger door. Niccolo appeared in the doorway behind me, his presence filling the small room even though he made no sound. "Are you ready?" I nodded, hefting my single duffel bag that contained everything I considered worth taking. Clothes, toiletries, a dog-eared paperback, and the small jewelry box that had belonged to my mother. It was pathetic, really, how little there was to show for my 26 years of life. "We should go," he said, taking the bag from my hand despite my protest. "My men report that the sheriff's car has been circling the block." A knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach, but I followed him down the stairs and into the bright afternoon sunlight. The storm had cleared completely, leaving behind a crisp autumn day that felt incongruously cheerful given the circumstances. The driver, a broad-shouldered man with close-cropped dark hair and watchful eyes, nodded respectfully to Niccolo and gave me a brief, assessing glance before taking my bag and stowing it in the trunk. The interior of the SUV was luxurious, with buttery leather seats and tinted windows that shielded us from view as soon as the doors closed. As we pulled away from the curb, I cast one last look at my apartment building. It had never been a true home, just a way station on my journey to somewhere else. Still, leaving felt momentous, the final severance of the last threads tying me to a life I'd been desperate to escape. "Having second thoughts?" Niccolo asked, watching me closely. I shook my head. "No, just saying goodbye, I guess." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. The first time I left Sicily, I stood on the deck of the ship and watched the coastline disappear. I thought my heart would break. The admission, so unexpectedly personal, surprised me. "Do you ever go back?" "Occasionally, but it's never the same." His expression turned distant. "The place remains, but the life you had there doesn't." We lapsed into silence as the SUV navigated through town. I tensed when we passed the sheriff's station, half expecting to see police cars roar to life in pursuit. But nothing happened. We crossed the town limits without incident, and I felt something uncoil inside me, a tension I hadn't even realized I was carrying. Once we hit the highway, Niccolo pulled out his phone and made another call, this time speaking in English, but using terms and phrases that meant nothing to me. Business matters, I assumed, though I caught the name Dean Wallace at one point, which sent a chill down my spine. When he finished, he turned his attention back to me. "Tell me about your life before Dean," he said, as if requesting a simple fact, rather than delving into my past. I shrugged, uncomfortable with the direct inquiry. "Not much to tell. Small-town girl, dead-end job, bad relationship. Classic story. I doubt anything about you is classic, Ellie," he said, and the certainty in his voice made me flush. "Where is your family?" "Gone," I replied, the words still carrying a sting even after all these years. "My mom died when I was 17. Cancer. Dad couldn't handle it, started drinking. Wrapped his truck around a tree 6 months later." I recited the facts with practiced detachment. "No siblings." Niccolo was quiet for a moment, absorbing this information. "So you've been alone." "I've been surviving," I corrected, a hint of defiance creeping into my tone. His lips curved in that barely there smile. "There's a difference between surviving and living, Ellie." The observation hit closer to home than I cared to admit. I turned to gaze out the window, watching the landscape transform from small-town sprawl to dense forest. We were heading into the mountains, the road winding higher with each mile. "What about you?" I asked after a while, curiosity overcoming my reticence. "You mentioned your grandmother. Do you have other family?" Something darkened in his expression. "My parents died when I was 12. My grandmother raised me until I was old enough to take over the family responsibilities." The clinical way he delivered this information suggested old pain, carefully contained. I have cousins, uncles, aunts. The extended family is extensive. I could only imagine what family responsibilities entailed in his line of work, but I didn't press the issue. Instead, I asked, "Why were you really in town? I can't believe a place like ours would be of any interest to someone like you." He studied me for a long moment, as if deciding how much to reveal. Officially, I was scouting a potential distribution route. Unofficially, he paused, choosing his words carefully. I needed some time away from New York, to think, to clear my head. "What about?" I asked before I could stop myself. His eyes met mine, surprisingly candid. The future. My future. The family's future. He gestured vaguely. All of it. I nodded, understanding the weight of expectations and responsibilities all too well, albeit on a vastly different scale. "And did you figure it out, before you got sidetracked by rescuing damsels in distress?" The corners of his eyes crinkled slightly, the closest thing to a genuine smile I'd seen from him. I believe I did, yes. The way he looked at me made my heart trip over itself. A sensation I hadn't experienced in a very long time. As the SUV continued its ascent into the mountains, my eyelids grew heavy. I hadn't slept well the night before. Despite the relative safety of Mrs. Peterson's apartment and the gentle motion of the vehicle combined with the warmth of the sun streaming through the window was lulling me toward sleep. "Rest," Niccolo said softly. "We have another hour at least." I wanted to protest, to stay alert and vigilant, but exhaustion won out. The last thing I remembered before drifting off was the sensation of something warm being draped over me, Niccolo's jacket, I realized dimly, and the murmur of his voice speaking quietly in Italian to the driver. When I woke, the quality of the light had changed. The sun was lower in the sky, casting long shadows across a landscape that had transformed completely. We were deep in the mountains now, following a private road that cut through ancient forest. The trees pressed close on either side, creating a natural tunnel of vibrant autumn colors. "Where are we?" I asked, my voice husky with sleep. "Almost there," Niccolo replied. He looked relaxed, one arm stretched along the back of the seat, his posture more open than I'd seen it before. Away from town, away from the complications of Dean and the sheriff. Some of the tension had bled out of him. The road curved sharply, and suddenly the trees gave way to reveal a sprawling property nestled in a natural clearing. The house, mansion would be more accurate, was a blend of traditional and modern architecture, all stone and glass and dark wood. It commanded a stunning view of the valley below, with the mountains rising majestically on the far horizon. "This is yours?" I asked, unable to keep the awe from my voice. "One of several properties," he replied, watching my reaction with what seemed like pleasure. "Do you like it?" "It's beautiful," I admitted, taking in the meticulous landscaping, the infinity pool that seemed to merge with the sky, the careful integration of the structure with its natural surroundings. As we pulled up to the front entrance, the massive wooden doors opened, and a middle-aged woman emerged. She was dressed simply, but elegantly, her silver-streaked dark hair pulled back in a neat bun. "Maria," Niccolo explained as the SUV came to a stop. "She manages the household. She's been with my family since before I was born." Maria greeted Niccolo with obvious affection, speaking rapidly in Italian as she embraced him. Then she turned to me, her keen eyes taking in every detail from my worn jeans to my faded sweater. "Welcome, Miss Ellie," she said, her accent much thicker than Niccolo's. "Mr. Russo has told me you will be our guest. Come, I will show you to your room." I glanced at Niccolo, suddenly uncertain. This was all happening so fast. Less than 24 hours ago, I'd been a waitress in a small-town diner, and now I was standing in front of a mansion with a Mafia boss and his housekeeper. "It's all right," he said, correctly interpreting my hesitation. "Maria will take good care of you. I have some business to attend to, but I'll join you for dinner. Make yourself at home." With that, he disappeared into the house, already on his phone again, leaving me to follow Maria through the imposing entrance. The interior of the house was even more impressive than the exterior. Soaring ceilings, massive windows that framed the spectacular views, artwork that looked like it belonged in a museum. rather than a private home. Maria led me through a series of hallways and up a curved staircase to a wing that she explained contained the guest suites. "Mr. Russo has placed you in the blue suite," she said, opening a door to reveal a room that was larger than my entire apartment. "It has the best view of the sunrise." The blue suite was aptly named. The decor featured various shades of blue, from deep navy to pale ice, creating a calming, oceanic atmosphere. A king-sized bed dominated one wall, while a sitting area with plush armchairs and a fireplace occupied another. Floor-to-ceiling windows opened onto a private balcony that overlooked the valley. "The bathroom is through there," Maria indicated a doorway. "Fresh towels, toiletries, everything you need." "And here," she opened a closet door to reveal a selection of women's clothing, all appearing to be approximately my size. "Mr. Russo arranged for these, in case you needed anything additional." I stared at the clothes, designer labels I recognized but had never dreamed of wearing, then back at Maria. "When did he arrange this? We just decided to come here this morning." Maria's expression was carefully neutral. "Mr. Russo is always prepared for contingencies." The implication that he had somehow anticipated my presence, had prepared for me before I even agreed to come, was both unsettling and strangely flattering. What had he seen in me, in our brief encounter, that made him so certain I would end up here? "Dinner will be at 7 in the main dining room," Maria continued. "I will come to escort you. In the meantime, please make yourself comfortable. There is a library down the hall if you wish to read, or you may explore the grounds. Security has been advised of your presence." With that, she left me alone in the luxurious suite, closing the door softly behind her. I sank onto the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the sudden turn my life had taken. Part of me wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it all. The small-town waitress swept away by a mysterious Mafia boss to his mountain retreat. It was like something out of a novel, too fantastic to be real. Yet it was real. The soft bedding beneath me, the breathtaking view through the windows, the faint scent of pine and wood smoke in the air. All of it was tangible, immediate, present. After a moment of contemplation, I decided to explore. The bathroom was a marvel of marble and glass, with a shower large enough for 4 people and a soaking tub positioned to take advantage of the view. The toiletries were high-end, the towels plush and monogrammed with an elegant R. I took a long, hot shower, washing away the lingering anxiety of the past 24 hours. Afterward, wrapped in a ridiculously soft robe, I examined the clothes in the closet. They were indeed my size, perhaps a touch more form-fitting than I would have chosen, but impeccably tailored and made of fabrics that felt luxurious against my skin. I selected a simple outfit, dark jeans and a cashmere sweater in a deep burgundy, and was relieved to find that they fit perfectly. After dressing, I ventured out to explore the house. The hallway outside my suite was lined with artwork, landscapes primarily, many featuring Sicilian vistas according to the small plaques beside them. The library Maria had mentioned was indeed just down the hall, a 2-story affair with rolling ladders and the comforting smell of old books and leather. I was examining the spines, everything from classics in multiple languages to modern bestsellers, when I sensed, rather than heard, someone enter the room behind me. "Find anything interesting?" Niccolo's voice sent a shiver down my spine. I turned to find him leaning against the doorframe, watching me with that intense gaze that seemed to see right through my defenses. He'd changed clothes, now wearing dark jeans similar to mine, and a charcoal sweater that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. "Your collection is impressive," I replied, gesturing to the shelves. "Do you actually read all these?" He pushed away from the door, moving into the room with that fluid grace that still reminded me more of a predator than a businessman. "Many of them, yes. Reading was my escape as a child. It still is when I can find the time." This glimpse of the boy he had been, seeking refuge in books from whatever darkness surrounded him, humanized him in a way that nothing else had. I could picture him curled in a window seat somewhere, lost in a story that transported him away from the realities of his life. "What do you like to read?" I asked, genuinely curious. "History, philosophy." His lips quirked. "The occasional thriller, though most get the details wrong. I could imagine the kind of details a man in his position would notice." "And poetry?" I asked, nodding toward a shelf dedicated to verse. Something flickered in his expression. Surprise, perhaps, that I had noticed. "Yes. Particularly Dante. "Abandon all hope, ye who enter here," I quoted, the famous line from Inferno seeming suddenly, uncomfortably relevant to my current situation. Niccolo's eyes sharpened. "You know Dante?" I shrugged, oddly pleased that I had impressed him. I had a good English teacher in high school. She loved the classics. He studied me with renewed interest, as if re-evaluating something in his assessment of me. Most people remember only that line, the warning at the gates of hell. They forget that Dante's journey doesn't end there. He passes through purgatory and eventually reaches paradise. With Beatrice as his guide, I added, remembering the broad strokes of the epic poem. His ideal of perfect love. Something shifted in Niccolo's gaze, a heat and intensity that hadn't been there before. Yes. The single word held layers of meaning I couldn't begin to interpret. An uncomfortable silence stretched between us, charged with something that made my pulse quicken. "Maria tells me you've settled in," he said finally, changing the subject. "Is the room to your liking?" "It's beautiful," I acknowledged. "Everything is. But Niccolo, I can't help wondering, what happens now?" He moved to the window, looking out at the mountains bathed in the golden light of approaching sunset. "Now, you rest. You take some time to yourself, away from Dean, away from that town, away from the life that was slowly crushing you." He turned back to face me. "And when you're ready, you decide what you want next. It can't be that simple," I argued, crossing my arms. "Why not?" He stepped closer, and I resisted the urge to back away. "What's stopping it from being that simple, Ellie?" "Because nothing is ever that simple," I replied, my voice rising slightly, "especially not with someone like you." His eyebrow arched. "Someone like me? A mafia boss," I said bluntly. "A man who carries a gun and has associates who can make problems disappear. A man who prepared a room for me before I even agreed to come here." Instead of being offended, he seemed almost pleased by my outburst. "You're right to be suspicious," he acknowledged. "In my world, nothing comes without strings. But sometimes, Ellie, the strings are visible only if you choose to look for them." "And if I do look?" I challenged. "What strings would I find attached to all this?" I gestured to encompass the library, the house, the implied protection he was offering. He considered me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Dinner will be ready soon," he said finally, sidestepping my question. "Would you like a tour of the grounds before we eat?" I wanted to press him, to demand the answers he was so carefully avoiding giving, but something in his demeanor suggested it would be futile, so I nodded, allowing him to lead me through the house and onto a stone terrace that overlooked the immaculately landscaped grounds. The property was even more extensive than it had appeared from the car. Gardens gave way to orchards, which transitioned to natural woodland. A path wound down to a lake that gleamed like molten gold in the setting sun. The mountains provided a natural barrier, creating a sense of isolation that was both comforting and slightly unnerving. "It's like another world," I murmured, taking in the peaceful beauty of the setting. "That's why I come here," Niccolo said, standing close enough that I could feel the heat of his body. "To remember that there's more to life than business, more to existence than power struggles and territory disputes." I glanced at him, struck by the weariness in his tone. "Do you ever wish you could just walk away from it all?" A sad smile touched his lips. "Every day. And never." The contradiction made perfect sense to me. I understood what it was to be trapped in a life you both resented and clung to, simply because the alternative was too frightening to contemplate. "In my world," he continued, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains, "family is everything. Legacy is everything. I was born into this life, Ellie. It's in my blood, my bones. Walking away would mean betraying not just those who depend on me now, but generations who came before." The weight of that responsibility was evident in the set of his shoulders, the gravity in his eyes. For all his power, for all his wealth, Niccolo Russo was as much a prisoner as I had been in my small-town existence. Just a different kind of cage, gilded with luxury and authority instead of fear and poverty. "I understand," I said softly. And I meant it. Duty is its own kind of prison. He turned to look at me then, genuine surprise flickering across his features. "Most people don't," he said. "They see the surface, the money, the power, the respect. They don't see the cost. I see you," I replied, the words slipping out before I could censor them. Something raw and vulnerable flashed in his eyes, gone so quickly I might have imagined it. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from my face with a gentleness that belied the strength in his hands. "Yes," he murmured. "I believe you do." The moment stretched between us, fraught with unspoken possibilities. Then the terrace doors opened, and Maria appeared, announcing that dinner was served. The spell broken, Niccolo stepped back, offering his arm with old-world formality. "Shall we?" I placed my hand on his arm, hyper-aware of the solid muscle beneath the soft fabric of his sweater, and allowed him to lead me back into the house. Whatever game we were playing, whatever dance we had begun, I knew with absolute certainty that I was out of my depth. But as we entered the dining room, with its flickering candles and crystal glasses glinting in the warm light, I found I didn't care. For the first time in years, I felt truly alive, and that was worth any risk. Dinner was an experience unlike anything I'd known before. The food was exquisite. A series of Italian dishes prepared by a chef I learned was brought in specially from New York. We ate by candlelight, the power outage in town having no impact on this self-sufficient estate with its own generators. Niccolo was an attentive host, filling my glass with wine from his family's vineyard in Sicily and explaining each course with obvious appreciation for the culinary traditions of his homeland. As we lingered over dessert, a delicate panna cotta that melted on my tongue, I found myself relaxing for the first time in years. The combination of excellent food, fine wine, and Niccolo's surprisingly engaging conversation created an atmosphere that felt almost dreamlike in its perfection. "You're smiling," he observed, watching me over the rim of his wineglass. "It suits you." I touched my lips, surprised to find that he was right. I guess I don't do it very often. "Then we must find more reasons for you to smile," he said, the intensity in his gaze making my cheeks warm. After dinner, we moved to a sitting room where a fire crackled in a massive stone fireplace. The room was more intimate than the formal dining area, with comfortable leather furniture arranged to take advantage of both the fire and the view through the wall of windows. Night had fallen completely now, and the valley below twinkled with distant lights, while the moon silvered the mountaintops. Niccolo poured us each a measure of amber liquid from a crystal decanter. "Sicilian brandy," he explained, handing me a snifter, "from grapes grown on land that has been in my family for 6 generations. I took a cautious sip, savoring the complex flavors that bloomed across my palate: honey, oak, spice, and something indefinable that spoke of sun-drenched hillsides and ancient traditions. "It's beautiful," I murmured. He smiled, pleased by my appreciation. "Like many beautiful things, it requires patience. The best vintages must age for decades." "Is that a metaphor?" I asked, curling my legs beneath me on the sofa. "Perhaps." He settled into an armchair across from me, the firelight casting dramatic shadows across his features. "I've learned that the most worthwhile things in life rarely come easily or quickly." Our conversation meandered through various topics: books we'd read, places he'd traveled, experiences that had shaped us. I found myself opening up more than I had with anyone in years, sharing stories of my childhood, my parents, the dreams I'd once had before life intervened. "You wanted to be a teacher," he said, seeming genuinely interested. "Why didn't you pursue it?" I shrugged, tracing the rim of my glass with my finger. "Money, mostly. After my parents died, there was nothing. I barely finished high school. College seemed impossible." "It's never too late," he observed. "If that's still what you want." I laughed softly. "I haven't thought about what I want in a long time. I've been too busy just surviving." His expression sobered. "And now?" "What do you want now, Ellie?" The question hung in the air between us, weighted with implications neither of us had voiced. I stared into the fire, considering my answer carefully. "Freedom," I said finally, meeting his gaze. "The freedom to make my own choices, to build a life that belongs to me and no one else." Something like approval flickered in his eyes. "A worthy ambition. And you?" I asked, emboldened by the brandy and the intimate setting. What does the great Niccolo Russo want that he doesn't already have? He was quiet for so long I thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer, stripped of its usual commanding tone. Peace, legacy, someone to share it all with who sees beyond the power and the name to the man beneath. The raw honesty in his admission caught me off guard. For all his carefully cultivated control, there was loneliness there, a yearning that mirrored my own in ways I hadn't expected. Is that why you were really in town? I asked, the pieces suddenly clicking into place. Not for business at all, but because you needed space to think about your future. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. You're very perceptive, Ellie. Yes, I was at a crossroads of sorts. My position, it comes with expectations, responsibilities to the family, the need to secure the future. Through marriage, I guessed, something cold settling in my stomach at the thought. He nodded. There were several suitable arrangements proposed. Alliances that would strengthen our position, expand our territory. His expression darkened. The women were all appropriate choices, from respected families, educated, prepared for the life, but something was missing. So you ran away to think, I said, understanding his impulse all too well. I took a strategic retreat, he corrected, though his eyes held a hint of amusement. And then I stopped at a diner in a storm and found something I wasn't looking for. My heart stuttered in my chest, and what was that? His gaze was steady, unwavering. Someone real. Someone who looked at me and saw Niccolo, not just the Russo name and all it represents. Someone with strength that has nothing to do with power or money. I swallowed hard, unsure how to respond to the naked admiration in his voice. You don't know me, I protested weakly. Not really. I know enough, he said, echoing his words from our breakfast conversation. I know you've survived things that would break many people. I know you help strangers even when you have nothing to give but kindness. I know you're intelligent, perceptive, and far more educated than your circumstances might suggest. His assessment left me breathless, not because it was flattering, but because it felt true in a way that transcended mere compliments. He saw me, really saw me, in a way no one had bothered to in years. What happens now? I asked. The question that had been hovering between us all day finally finding voice. Niccolo set his glass aside and leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. That depends on you, Ellie. My associates in town will ensure that Dean and his uncle no longer present a threat to you. You're free to return if you wish, though I think we both know there's nothing for you there. And the alternative? I prompted when he paused. Stay, he said simply. Not as a guest, not as someone under my protection, but as a partner. Let me give you the freedom you want, the resources to pursue your education, to travel, to discover who you are beyond the confines of that small town and smaller life. I stared at him, stunned by the offer. In exchange for what? The chance to know you, he replied, his voice low and earnest. The opportunity to see if what I felt the moment I saw you in that diner was real or just the fantasy of a man tired of living in shadows. The raw vulnerability in his confession stole my breath. This powerful man, this dangerous man, was offering me everything I'd ever wanted. Freedom, security, opportunity, and asking for nothing in return but the chance to see if there could be something between us. It seemed too good to be true, and in my experience, things that seemed too good to be true invariably were. You're a mafia boss, I said bluntly. Your business is, what, drugs? Weapons? Extortion? Instead of being offended by my candor, he seemed to appreciate it. The Russo family has diverse interests, he acknowledged, some more legitimate than others. I won't insult your intelligence by claiming my hands are clean, Ellie. But I can promise you this. Whatever develops between us will be separate from that world. You will never be asked to participate in anything you find morally objectionable. Can anyone really separate those parts of their life so neatly? I challenged. He conceded the point with a slight incline of his head. Perhaps not entirely, but I would do everything in my power to keep you safe. Not just physically, but emotionally and ethically as well. I rose from the sofa and moved to the windows, needing space to think. The night sky stretched above us, stars scattered like diamonds across black velvet, so much more visible here away from the lights of town. I've spent my whole life feeling trapped, I said finally, not turning to look at him. First by poverty, then by Dean, then by fear. I can't trade one cage for another, Niccolo, no matter how gilded. I heard him move, felt his presence behind me, though he didn't touch me. I'm not offering a cage, Ellie. I'm offering a choice. Stay or go. Either way, you'll have the means to build the life you want. Just like that? No strings attached? I turned to face him, searching his expression for any sign of deception. Just like that, he confirmed. Though I hope you'll stay, at least long enough for us to explore what might exist between us. His hand lifted, hovering near my cheek without making contact. May I? I nodded, and his fingers traced the curve of my face with exquisite gentleness. His touch sent electricity skittering across my skin, awakening sensations I'd thought long dead after years with Dean. From the moment I saw you in that diner, he murmured, something inside me recognized you, not just your beauty, though you are beautiful, Ellie, but your spirit, the fire that keeps burning despite everything that's tried to extinguish it. His words unraveled something tightly coiled inside me, some defense mechanism I'd built to survive the harshness of my life. Tears pricked at my eyes, not from sadness, but from the sheer relief of being seen, truly seen, by another human being. I'm afraid, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. Of me? He asked, his thumb gently wiping away a tear that had escaped. I shook my head. Of hoping. Of believing this could be real. His eyes, so dark and intense, held mine. It is real. I am real. What I feel for you is real, unexpected as it may be. He leaned closer, his intention clear, giving me every opportunity to pull away. I didn't. When his lips finally met mine, the kiss was achingly gentle, a question more than a demand. I answered by stepping closer, my hands coming to rest on his chest where I could feel the strong, steady beat of his heart. The kiss deepened, his arms encircling me with a strength that should have frightened me, but instead made me feel inexplicably safe. When we finally broke apart, both breathless, he rested his forehead against mine. Stay, he whispered. Not forever. Not unless you choose it, but stay long enough to see what we might become together. In that moment, with his arms around me and the taste of him still on my lips, the decision seemed not just easy, but inevitable. Yes, I breathed. I'll stay. The next few weeks passed in a blur of discovery, of Niccolo, of the world he inhabited, but most importantly, true to his word, he gave me freedom in ways I'd never experienced before. I enrolled in online courses, the first step toward the teaching degree I'd abandoned years ago. I explored the property, spent hours in the library, learned to ride the horses kept in the stables at the far end of the estate. Niccolo was often busy, his business requiring frequent video conferences and occasional trips to New York, but when we were together, his attention was undivided and absolute. He taught me to cook traditional Sicilian dishes, introduced me to wines I'd never heard of, read poetry to me by firelight in that rich, accented voice that sent shivers down my spine. And at night, when we retired to what had become our shared bedroom, he taught me that passion could be gentle, that desire could be patient, that my pleasure mattered as much as his own. In his arms, I found healing for wounds I hadn't even realized still bled. 6 months after that stormy night at the diner, we stood on the terrace overlooking the valley, now lush with spring growth. His arms encircled me from behind, his chin resting on the top of my head. Happy? He asked, a question he posed often, always attentive to my emotional state. Yes, I replied honestly. And I was. The shadows of my past had receded, though they would never completely disappear. Dean and his uncle had mysteriously relocated to the opposite coast, their sudden departure the subject of much gossip in my old town. I never asked Niccolo for details, and he never offered them. I had begun student teaching at a school in the nearby town, where I was known simply as Ellie Russo, Niccolo's wife, another development that had unfolded naturally, almost inevitably, as winter gave way to spring. The simple gold band on my finger caught the sunlight as I lifted my hand to cover his, where it rested on my still flat stomach. "I have something to tell you," I said, turning in his embrace to see his face. His expression was open, curious, as he waited for me to continue. "We're going to have a baby," I said, watching as surprise, joy, and a fierce protectiveness transformed his features. "Ellie," he breathed, his hands cradling my face with reverence. "You're certain?" I nodded, smiling through sudden tears. "The doctor confirmed it yesterday." He dropped to his knees before me, pressing his face against my abdomen, his arms wrapped around my waist. When he looked up, there was such naked emotion in his eyes that it took my breath away. "You have given me everything," he said, his voice rough with feeling. "A love I never thought to find. A family of my own. A future worth fighting for." I ran my fingers through his dark hair, marveling at the journey that had brought us to this moment. From a rain-soaked diner to this sunlit terrace, from strangers to lovers, to partners in the truest sense. "No," I corrected gently. "We gave these things to each other." As he rose to his feet and gathered me in his arms, I thought of that night in the library when he'd spoken of Dante's journey from hell to paradise. My own journey had followed a similar path. From the prison of my life with Dean, through the purgatory of uncertainty and fear, to the paradise I'd found in Niccolo's arms. Not a perfect paradise, not without complications or challenges, but real and mine and freely chosen. And in the end, that freedom to choose was the greatest gift he could have given me.